So hi and welcome to Data Explorer's Market Update with me, Will Duff-Gordon, and I'm back and grateful for the various lieutenants for filling in for me while I've had two very interesting but intense days in Amsterdam. Anyway, I'm back and I'm forced on client demand to cover the situation in the Iberian banks. In a way, that's the last thing I feel like drawing further attention to, because it feels like we've covered the story before. However, the media are whipping up a storm around this, and we kind of can't avoid it because companies like us that have data on what the markets are actually doing probably need to speak up and actually show what the facts show to sort of temper and counterbalance what the BBC or the FT or the Wall Street Journal might be alleging the markets are saying. So let's go into the sort of rather strange conflicting approaches to bailing out sort of quasi-federal states across both sides of the Atlantic. In the US, they said this week that essentially the authorities do not have any appetite to bail out any of their federal states, despite how in debt places like California are. Meanwhile, over in Europe, the European Union is trying to put more money into the Financial Stability Fund and is, according to some reports, leaking to the press the need for Portugal to come and ask them for a bailout, and really pushing Portugal, like they did Ireland, to going and tapping for extra funding to clear up any residual worries over the euro. So, there's a different approach here. Now, are investors thinking that Portugal is heading for a bailout? Well, the situation was not cleared up with Ireland. Those large short positions in many of Portugal's big banks remain there, and in fact, they've got even bigger. So, Banco Comercial Português, Banco Espírito Santo, and Banco BPI, they are all seeing rising short interest. And in fact, the last one, BPI, is currently at about 5 or 6% of its shares outstanding, and BCP is at 8%, which is a sort of record high for it. So there's no let up in investors thinking that these kind of Iberian banks in Portugal are not going to fare well if a bailout happens. So on tempering that slightly, though, is the fact that some institutional investors have been just recently buying a few more shares, particularly in BCP. Now, are they catching a falling knife, or are these sensible value investors who predict a bailout and predict the share prices rebounding as these banks get supported and maybe nationalised? They're definitely not one that I'm willing to step into there, but that's tempering the negative sentiment slightly. If we look at the government bonds, the sovereign debt of Portugal, what's happening there? Well, unfortunately, it's also not looking so good. Institutional investors who've been sort of reducing their holdings in Portuguese government bonds have been selling yet more in the last fortnight. If you want to see which actual names, you can look at my report. And then also the demand to borrow, whether to cover a short sale of these government bonds or to hedge a CDS that a bank has sold, has also, so the borrowing of these government bonds has gone up too in many of them, and again the names are in the report. So things are negative looking at the sovereign bond market for Portugal as well. In Spain, Banco Popular is seeing a bit of short covering, the perennial short, although Banco de Valencia and Banco de Sabadell have hit new highs in terms of short selling, with Banco de Sabadell at 14% of all shares short. We ran a dashboard across 361 European banks to see where the positive and negative sentiment was, and the positive sentiment really surrounds UK, French, and interestingly, Italian banks. So investors are buying more shares and they're covering shorts in HSBC, Barclays, RBS, Unicredito, and Crédit Agricole in France, BNP, and Italian bank UBI. So that's really kind of like where the sort of modicum of good news is here. So that is my piece on the Iberian banks. This is not a story that I suspect is going to go away anytime soon, and that is our contribution. If you'd like to read the report, please go to dataexplorers.com/news.